Come sit with me for a moment. Just for a moment. You don't have to adjust your posture. You don't have to soften your voice. You don't have to explain who you are or why you're here. Just sit. I'm not asking you to stay forever. I'm not asking you to believe anything yet. I'm only asking you to let your shoulders drop a little, the way they do when no one is watching. You've been holding yourself upright for a very long time. I know that, and before anything else is said, before any idea is touched, I want you to hear this clearly. There is nothing you need to prove in this space. Not your strength, not your kindness, not your youth, not your worth. I'm not here to measure you against anyone, not against time, not against memory, not against women who came before you or after you. I'm here to speak with you, not about you, and I'm speaking softly, because this part of you has learned to listen quietly. If you've ever walked into a room and felt the subtle shift, the unspoken comparison, you know what I mean. No one says it out loud. No one has to. You feel it in the way conversations pause, in the way mirrors start to feel less friendly, in the way your own mind begins negotiating with itself. You start asking questions you never used to ask. Am I still enough? Am I still seen? Am I still chosen? Those questions don't come from vanity. They come from fatigue. They come from years of being steady, capable, present, and still wondering if that steadiness has somehow become invisible. So come a little closer to this moment. Not physically, emotionally. Let me be very clear with you. Without drama, without exaggeration, without comfort that feels false. You are not behind. You are not late. You are not fading. What you're experiencing is not loss. It's transition. And transitions feel quiet on the outside, but loud on the inside. I'm saying this as someone who has watched many forms of strength. The loud kind that announces itself, the fast kind that dazzles for a moment, and the steady kind that doesn't ask for attention but changes the entire room when it enters. The last kind is the one people often overlook until they need it. You may have noticed that the world talks endlessly about becoming something, becoming younger, becoming brighter, becoming more, but very little is said about arriving, about being here, about having already lived enough life to recognize what actually matters. That silence can feel isolating, especially when you've spent years being the one others leaned on, the one who listened, the one who understood without interrupting, the one who carried things gracefully, even when they were heavy. You weren't trained to ask for reassurance. You were trained to be reassurance, and that can make moments like this feel strange. To pause, to rest, to receive instead of provide. But nothing is being taken from you by sitting here. You're not giving anything up. You're simply allowing yourself to be met where you are. There's a particular tiredness that comes from feeling like you have to keep up rather than simply show up. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It says things like, maybe I should try harder. Maybe I should change something. Maybe I'm asking for too much by wanting to be seen as I am. If that whisper sounds familiar, I want you to know something important. That voice did not originate in you. It was learned. It was absorbed. It was repeated often enough that it began to feel personal. But it is not the truth of you. The truth of you is quieter, steadier, and far less demanding. It doesn't rush you. It doesn't compare you. It doesn't ask you to compete for space. It simply says, I am here. I'm not here to replace that voice. I'm only here to remind you that it exists. And if you're wondering why I'm speaking to you this way without instruction, without correction, it's because you don't need to be fixed. You need to be acknowledged. There's a difference. Fixing assumes something is broken. Acknowledging recognizes something that has been carrying weight for a long time without complaint. You've learned to move through the world with composure, with restraint, with a kind of elegance that doesn't draw attention to itself. But composure can sometimes be mistaken for absence. And I want you to hear this, gently and without pressure. Your presence is not diminished by time. It's refined by it. The calm you bring into a space is not accidental. The way you listen is not common. The depth you offer is not replaceable. Those are not things that disappear with age. They become more precise, more intentional, more real. If all you do right now is sit with that idea, not agree with it, not argue with it, just sit with it, that's enough. You don't have to arrive anywhere tonight. You don't have to resolve anything. You're allowed to stay right here in the middle of the feeling, without rushing to name it. I'm still here with you, not pulling you forward, not pushing you back, just staying present long enough for you to remember what it feels like to be met without evaluation. And we can remain right here, quietly, letting this moment breathe, until it naturally leads us into the next thought, without forcing it, without breaking the rhythm, without leaving the safety of this conversation. You know, there's a particular kind of idea that doesn't arrive loudly. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't ask for permission. It settles in quietly, over years, until one day it feels like something you've always known. That idea sounds like this: that at some point, love becomes a competition. That time turns into a scoreboard. That youth is the advantage, and experience is the compromise. No one sat you down and taught you this directly. It would have been too obvious if they had. Instead, you absorbed it through small moments, through glances that lingered a little longer on someone younger, through stories that celebrated beginnings and rarely honored continuations, through a world that talks endlessly about next, but rarely about now. And slowly, without meaning to, you learn to measure yourself, not against who you used to be, not against who you are becoming, but against someone you were never meant to compete with. That's the lie. And I want to talk about it gently, because it's not a lie you chose. It's a lie you inherited. You see, competition implies scarcity. It suggests that there is only so much affection available, only so much attention, only so much desire, and that it must be won. But love has never worked that way. It never did. What changed wasn't love. What changed was the noise around it. Somewhere along the way, you were taught quietly that being chosen meant staying impressive, staying light, staying easy to replace. So when you feel that tightening in your chest, when you wonder if someone might prefer someone younger, it's not insecurity speaking. It's conditioning. And conditioning can feel deeply personal, even when it isn't. I've watched this from the other side, more than once. Men don't talk about it openly, but we feel it too. The exhaustion of surfaces, the emptiness of novelty when it has no depth to rest on. Youth can be captivating, but captivation isn't the same as connection. Connection asks for something else entirely. It asks for steadiness, for emotional range, for the ability to sit with another person without trying to rearrange them. Those are not skills you lose with time. Those are skills you earn. Yet the lie keeps whispering. If you're not competing, you're falling behind. So you start monitoring yourself, your appearance, your tone, your needs. You tell yourself you should want less, ask less, feel less. Not because you actually want to, but because you don't want to seem like too much in a world that rewards lightness over depth. And that's where the real cost appears. Not in who chooses you, but in how you begin to choose yourself. You may have noticed moments where you shrink just a little. You soften an opinion. You pause before expressing a desire. You decide not to speak, not because you have nothing to say, but because you're not sure it will be welcomed. That hesitation didn't come from age. It came from believing you were in a race you never signed up for. Let me say this clearly, without trying to convince you of anything. A woman who is no longer competing changes the entire emotional temperature of a room. She's not performing. She's not negotiating her value. She's not trying to be selected. She's present. And presence does something youth alone cannot do. It calms. It grounds. It invites honesty. When a man has lived enough life, novelty stops being the priority. He's drawn toward what feels stable, not stagnant, toward what feels deep, not demanding. That doesn't make you superior. It makes you specific. The lie wants you to believe that specificity is a weakness, that being particular, textured, fully formed, somehow limits your appeal. But limitation is not the same as clarity. Clarity saves time. Clarity saves energy. Clarity creates real connection instead of constant evaluation. You're not less desirable because you know who you are. You're simply no longer available for confusion. And that can be unsettling to a world that thrives on uncertainty. The lie also tells you that being chosen means being effortless. That if love were right, it wouldn't require patience, understanding, or emotional presence. But the truth is, effortless love is often shallow love. It feels good at first because nothing is being asked. Real love asks gently, but it does ask. It asks to be seen. It asks to be met. It asks to be taken seriously. Those are not demands. They are invitations, and you are allowed to extend them without apologizing. If you've felt moments of grief not for a person, but for a version of yourself you think you've lost, I want you to hold that feeling with kindness. That grief isn't about youth. It's about recognition. You don't want to be admired from a distance. You want to be understood up close. The lie never taught you that understanding is rare. It only taught you that attention is visible. So it pushed you toward visibility instead of intimacy. But intimacy doesn't compete. It connects. It doesn't ask who's younger. It asks who's real. And the moment you stop measuring yourself against imagined rivals, something loosens inside you. Your breath deepens. Your voice steadies. Your presence becomes less guarded. Not because you've given up, but because you've stepped out of a game that was draining you. I'm not asking you to reject the world's messages aggressively. You don't need to fight them. You only need to stop internalizing them. You don't lose because someone else is younger. You suffer because you were told you had to compete. And suffering can be unlearned. Quietly, gently, at your own pace. So if you notice a soft resistance rising in you right now, not anger, just recognition, that's okay. That's not discomfort. That's awareness returning. And we can stay right here with that awareness, without rushing it into conclusions, letting it settle naturally, the way truth does when it's finally given room to breathe. What you carry now is not weakness. It may feel heavier than it used to, but heaviness is not the same thing as fragility. I want you to hear that slowly, without rushing past it. What you carry now is not the loss of something. It is the accumulation of something. Years don't hollow you out. They fill you in. They add layers that weren't there before, layers you didn't ask for, but learned to live with anyway. Understanding layered over disappointment. Patience layered over urgency. Discernment layered over hope. None of that makes you smaller. It makes you solid. You've noticed, haven't you, how your reactions have changed. You don't rush toward everything anymore. You don't feel the need to explain yourself to everyone. You listen longer. You speak less. But when you do, it matters. That shift didn't happen because you became tired of life. It happened because life taught you what deserves your energy. There is a quiet strength in that kind of selectiveness. The world doesn't always celebrate it, because it's not loud. It doesn't sparkle on command. It doesn't beg to be noticed. But it steadies everything around it. I've learned something over time, watching people, working alongside them, building things that require endurance. The most valuable components are rarely the flashiest ones. They're the ones that hold under pressure. The ones that don't panic when conditions change. The ones that keep working long after novelty wears off. You're not meant to be decorative at this stage of life. You're meant to be foundational, and foundations don't announce themselves. They're felt. You carry perspective now. Not the kind that argues, but the kind that understands context. You can sense when something has depth and when it's only noise. That discernment didn't come from luck. It came from being wrong before, from staying too long, from leaving when it hurt, from learning which compromises cost too much. Those experiences didn't diminish you. They refined you. There's a difference. Weakness breaks under pressure. What you carry bends, adjusts, and holds. You may not feel invincible anymore, and that's not a flaw. Invincibility often comes from not knowing what's at stake. You know now. You know what loss feels like. You know what resilience actually requires. You know that love is not a fantasy, it's a responsibility to another human being. That knowledge doesn't make you guarded, it makes you conscious, and consciousness is deeply attractive to the right kind of connection. There's a calm in you now that didn't exist before, a calm that doesn't rush intimacy, a calm that doesn't confuse intensity with truth. You don't fall into things blindly anymore. You enter them with awareness. That's not fear. That's maturity. You've learned how to stay present even when things are uncertain. You've learned how to sit with unanswered questions without collapsing into them. You've learned how to continue loving without losing yourself. Those are not small accomplishments. They don't show up in mirrors the way youth once did, but they show up in relationships, in conversations, in the way people relax around you without knowing exactly why. I've seen this kind of strength misunderstood, mistaken for distance, mistaken for indifference, mistaken for a lack of need. But it's not that you don't need connection. You just don't need chaos to feel alive. You don't need to be consumed to feel chosen. What you offer now is not urgency. It's steadiness. Not excitement that burns quickly, but warmth that lasts. And warmth is what people return to when they've grown tired of being dazzled. You might sometimes miss the ease of earlier days, the way desire felt simple, the way attraction didn't carry so much history. That longing doesn't mean you want to go back. It means you're honoring who you were. But you're not meant to live there anymore. You are here now, with depth, with clarity, with the ability to see someone fully and still choose them. That capacity is rare. It's also quiet. And quiet things are often mistaken for weakness in a world addicted to noise. But silence can hold more truth than sound. Stillness can contain more power than movement. You don't need to convince anyone of your value. The right presence will feel it without explanation. You've earned the right to move at your own pace, to want connection without urgency, to open slowly, honestly, without apology. That's not retreat. That's alignment. What you carry now is not something to set down. It's something to trust. And as we stay here with this understanding, without forcing conclusions, without trying to wrap it up neatly, you may begin to notice something subtle shifting, not outside of you, inside, a soft recognition that nothing essential has been lost, only transformed. And that transformation is still unfolding, quietly, naturally, as we allow this conversation to continue breathing, without interruption, into whatever comes next. The moment you stop competing, something shifts. Not loudly, not dramatically. It doesn't arrive like a breakthrough or an announcement. It arrives like a quiet exhale you didn't realize you were holding. You don't wake up one morning feeling completely different. Nothing about your life suddenly rearranges itself. But inside you, something loosens. And I want to stay with that moment for a while, because it's subtle. And subtle things are easy to overlook. For a long time, competition lived in your body more than in your thoughts. It showed up as tension before you even named it. A tightness in your shoulders, a carefulness in your smile, a quiet habit of checking yourself before you fully arrive somewhere. Not because you wanted to compete, but because you learned to stay alert. When comparison becomes a background noise, the nervous system adapts. You begin to monitor without realizing you're monitoring. You scan rooms. You read pauses. You adjust. And over time, that adjustment feels like responsibility. But the moment you stop competing, the body notices first. Your breathing slows. Your posture softens. Your eyes stop searching for reference points. You're no longer asking, how do I fit here? You're simply here. That shift isn't about confidence in the way people usually describe it. It's not bravado. It's not self-assurance that needs to be proven. It's permission. Permission to occupy space without negotiating it. Permission to speak without pre-editing yourself. Permission to listen without waiting for your turn to justify your presence. You don't become louder when competition ends. You become clearer. And clarity has a different energy. I've noticed this in rooms where nothing obvious changed, yet everything felt different. One person stopped trying to position themselves, and suddenly the atmosphere softened. Conversations slowed down. People leaned in instead of posturing. That's not coincidence. When you're no longer competing, you're no longer broadcasting need. And need, especially unspoken need, creates tension. Presence, on the other hand, creates ease. You might recognize this in yourself already, in small moments. When you forget to compare for a few minutes, when you're engaged in a conversation and suddenly time feels irrelevant, when you laugh without checking how it sounds, those moments aren't accidents. They're glimpses of who you are when nothing is being defended. You don't lose desire when you stop competing. Desire simply changes tone. It becomes quieter, but more grounded, less performative, more honest. You're not trying to be wanted. You're allowing yourself to be known. That distinction matters. Being wanted often relies on projection, what someone imagines you to be. Being known requires contact with your reality, your boundaries, your rhythm. And when you're no longer measuring yourself against others, your rhythm returns to you. You walk a little slower. You respond a little more deliberately. You don't rush to fill silences. Silence stops feeling dangerous. And in that silence, something important happens. People show you who they are, not who they perform as, who they actually are. Competition keeps you busy adjusting. Stillness gives you information. You begin to notice what feels nourishing and what feels depleting. Which interactions leave you calm? Which ones leave you tight? You stop overriding those signals. That's not withdrawal. That's discernment. And discernment doesn't harden you. It softens you toward the right things. There's also a shift in how you relate to your own reflection. Not because you suddenly love everything you see, but because you stop interrogating it. You look and you recognize yourself instead of evaluating yourself. Recognition is gentler than judgment. You may find that when competition fades, tenderness returns, not just toward others, but toward yourself. You allow yourself to feel tired without turning it into a flaw. You allow yourself to want connection without calling it weakness. You allow yourself to rest without explaining why you deserve it. Those allowances accumulate. They create a quieter inner environment. And in that quiet, your presence deepens. People often mistake intensity for depth, but depth is steady. It doesn't rush intimacy. It doesn't escalate emotions to secure attachment. It trusts timing. When you stop competing, you stop trying to accelerate closeness. You let it develop naturally, or not at all. That patience isn't indifference. It's self-respect. You're no longer asking to be chosen quickly. You're allowing yourself to be chosen carefully. And that changes the kind of connections you attract. Not more. Different. You may notice fewer dramatic encounters, less emotional volatility, more grounded exchanges. At first, that can feel unfamiliar, almost quiet enough to be mistaken for absence. But it's not absence. It's stability. Stability doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself over time. And time is something you're no longer afraid of losing. The moment you stop competing, you stop fighting time as an enemy. You begin to experience it as context. Time becomes something that deepens interactions rather than threatening them. You don't need to rush toward outcomes. You don't need to secure futures in advance. You're present. And presence is persuasive without trying to be. I'm not describing a transformation you have to achieve. I'm describing something that unfolds when pressure releases. There's no promise here. No guarantee of outcomes. Only an observation of what changes internally when comparison loosens its grip. You don't become someone else. You return to yourself. And that return is not dramatic. It's subtle. It's lived. It's felt in the body more than the mind. You may still have moments where comparison tries to re-enter. That's natural. But now, you recognize it sooner. You don't follow it as far. You pause. And in that pause, you choose presence again. Not as a rule, not as a principle, but as a preference. And as we stay here without closing anything off, without rushing toward conclusions, you might notice that this preference doesn't require effort. It feels like relief. Like standing still after a long walk and realizing you don't have to keep moving to justify where you are. We can remain right here with that feeling, letting it settle naturally, allowing it to carry us forward without pushing, without promises, into whatever understanding is ready to surface next. You don't need to win to be chosen. I want that sentence to land gently, not as a conclusion, not as advice, but as something you can sit with for a while, like a thought that doesn't demand agreement, only presence. Winning suggests effort aimed outward. Chosen suggests recognition that moves inward. Those two things have been quietly tangled for a long time. Somewhere along the way, many women were taught without words that being chosen meant doing something right, looking right, responding right, timing everything correctly. So if connection didn't happen, it felt personal, like a miscalculation, like a misstep. But being chosen was never meant to be the reward for performance. It's not a prize at the end of endurance. It's not something earned by outlasting others. It's something that happens when two realities meet and recognize each other. And recognition doesn't require victory. You've probably noticed this already, even if you've never named it. The people who truly stayed in your life weren't the ones you impressed the most. They were the ones who saw you clearly and didn't turn away. That kind of choosing feels different in the body. It doesn't create adrenaline. It creates calm. It doesn't feel like being elevated. It feels like being allowed to rest. I think that's why the idea of winning eventually becomes exhausting. Winning keeps you upright. Being chosen lets you sit down, and you've spent enough years standing. There's a quiet dignity in no longer needing to outshine anyone. Not because you couldn't, but because you don't need to. When you stop orienting yourself toward winning, your attention shifts. You start noticing how interactions feel instead of how they look. You begin trusting your own comfort as information. You don't ask, did I do well? You ask, did this feel honest? That question changes everything. Because honesty doesn't compete. It resonates. And resonance isn't universal. It's specific. Not everyone will feel it. But the ones who do won't need convincing. You don't need to prove your softness is strength. You don't need to explain why you move at this pace now. You don't need to justify the boundaries that protect your peace. The right presence doesn't interpret those things as barriers. It experiences them as clarity. I've come to believe that being chosen later in life often feels quieter than we expect. There's less ceremony, less urgency, but more truth. It doesn't sweep you away. It settles beside you. And that can feel almost anticlimactic if you were taught to expect fireworks. But fireworks fade quickly. What stays is warmth. Warmth is underrated because it doesn't demand attention. It simply remains. You bring warmth now not because you try to, but because you've learned how to stay open without losing yourself. That openness is not naivete. It's courage shaped by experience. You've learned when to lean in and when to pause. You've learned that love doesn't need to rush to be real. You've learned that being chosen doesn't require shrinking or expanding, only arriving as you are. That arrival is enough. You may still encounter moments where the old instinct flares. A glance, a comparison, a fleeting thought that asks whether you should be more. Different, younger. When that happens, I don't want you to fight it. Fighting gives it importance. Just notice it, and then notice what follows when you don't act on it. Often, what follows is relief. A return to your natural rhythm. A remembering that you're not auditioning. You're living. And living doesn't require approval to continue. I'm not promising outcomes. I'm not suggesting that letting go of competition guarantees connection. What I'm saying is quieter than that. Letting go of competition gives you back your own experience. It allows you to meet others without armor or agenda. It lets you choose as much as be chosen. That mutuality is where real connection grows. You don't need to be exceptional to be loved. You need to be present. You don't need to win someone over. You need to feel safe being yourself. And safety isn't created by victory. It's created by compatibility. Compatibility doesn't announce itself with intensity. It reveals itself with ease. You might find that as you rest into this understanding, your desire for validation softens. Not disappears, just loosens. You care, but you're no longer captive to outcomes. That freedom is subtle, but it's real. It allows you to stay open without being exposed, to hope without bargaining, to connect without self-erasure. And if nothing else comes from this moment, no answers, no decisions, no next steps, that's okay. You don't need to move anywhere from here. You can remain in this awareness, letting it breathe, letting it integrate, letting it accompany you without directing you. I'm still here in the same way I've been present, unhurried, not asking you to become anything else. And if you stay exactly as you are right now, without winning, without proving, without striving, that in itself is already enough to be seen.